You who read your email this week and are here on time. Thank you for being here. My name is Amy Collins, and I'm a worship associate and a commissioned lay minister of this congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I bid you welcome whether you're here in person, watching live as it unfolds virtually, or playing catch-up at a later date or time on our YouTube channel. In case you're new to our community or to Unitarian Universalism, let me tell you a little bit about us. As Unitarian Universalists, one of our core principles is recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person. As a community, we recognize the interconnected web of all existence. As a pluralist faith, we're happy to have you join us whether you celebrate the earth, love the goddess, love Jesus, or find your inspiration and comfort from the reliability of science and humanist teachings. Our covenant with one another transcends race, gender identity, sexual identity, financial means, age, and all of the other elements of who we are that some might use to divide us. We hope that you'll find comfort, connection, challenge, and love here. Whoever you are, wherever you come from, whomever you love, know that you are welcome here. We especially welcome any guests who are worshiping with us for the first time. And if you're interested in learning more information about who we are, we invite you to fill out one of the guest cards in the pew rack in front of you. And you can place that card in the offering plate when it comes around later in the service so we can reach out to you and answer any questions you might have about our congregation. If you're watching from an internet platform, you can go to our website, uucleveland.org. On the back of your order of service is a QR code. It'll take you to a contact tracing form. Please take a moment before you leave today to fill out that form. Very simple, just takes a few minutes. And you can also access it via the bit.ly link on your computer when you get home if you forget to do it while you're here. We are about to enter into sacred space, so please take a moment to silence any of those pesky electronic devices that are otherwise so convenient but not here. One announcement I want to make, I'm sure you'll be hearing more about coming up events and things from Reverend Randy later, but over the summer we'll be focusing our worship on the theme of connections. And in August, on August 28th, we'll be doing what we call a Hyde Park service, which comes from the literal standing on a soapbox and expressing your opinions in Hyde Park, London. And it's been a tradition here and before that at the Society. Some of you may have participated pre-pandemic, but I think it's been a while since we had one. Sometimes they're themed, sometimes they're not. This year it will be in keeping with our theme of connections. And it's something for you to think about. We usually invite anywhere between 4 and 6 people to talk about a topic from 3 to 5 minutes. So now is the time to be reflecting on connections, and that could be unpacked in a lot of different ways. Connection to, connection with, between, animals, nature, other people, families, communities, etc. There's so many other ways that we can look at the theme of connection. So I'll be coordinating that service, so if you're interested, find a way to contact me, either in person or via email. My number's in the directory, and there'll also be, of course, information in the email blast that goes out with a more convenient way to directly connect with me. So be thinking about whether you'd like to participate in that service on August 28th. And now we're going to invite Carol Gay up to do our chalice lighting as we read the words together. Carol, you have to know if you've been coming for even a minute because she's finished up her second term as our board president. So this is her first week here, not as president, and we thank her for her service. And we are assured that she will continue to be involved in efforts like membership and, of course, singing with the choir. Mike's like, yes, still in the choir. So you'll still see her actively involved, but maybe a little more relaxed. So please join me in our chalice lighting words. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another.
We are called to worship today by the words of Maureen Killeran, who writes, "In this free church, we come together without creed, focusing instead on the core values of justice, equity, and compassion, of mutual acceptance of our diverse ways of being as we seek to connect ourselves more fully with the unfolding truths of life and of our world. We come together in shared conviction that all people deserve a voice in matters that concern them, and that it is up to each of us to protect the rights of all, particularly those who, for whatever reason, have long been held in silence. We come together in the stubborn belief that community is possible and that peace is more than a dream. We commit together to affirm in our actions as well as our words the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. We come together in awareness of our interdependence with all humanity and with the wider web of existence, for that too is part of what we mean by we. In this free church, we come together without creed, believing that the way we live in the world bears testament to the value of our beliefs. Our chalice is a beacon of hope for all who have gathered here this day, for all who have ever walked through our doors, for those who may yet find this a spiritual home, and hope for those whose paths will never come our way. For all this, and for all those things we dare to hope and dream, we join together in worship this day. We're about to sing "How Could Anyone?" It is in the teal hymnal, but the words are in your order of service today for you. But before we do that, I invite you to take a moment to greet one another. If you're joining us online, you can put a greeting in the chat below if you would like. And in just a moment, we'll sing. Now is the time in our service where we share our joys and concerns with one another. If you're joining us online, you can put any joys or concerns that you'd like to share with the congregation in the comments below. We do have people in our community who are still grieving the recent Supreme Court decision, and I just want to lift up that on Wednesday night we'll have a gathering here, not to make plans or have any grand solutions, but just to be in community with one another and express our anger or grief as we would like. That'll be downstairs in the fellowship hall on Wednesday evening at 7. So a stone of grief for that. And the July 4th holiday always brings mixed feelings about who is free in our country, even as we celebrate our own freedom. There is some sense of moral injury regarding the actions taken to secure and protect freedom that is less than complete. So a stone of mixed feelings about our holiday tomorrow. And Amy, Sharon, and Leilani are excited about the sale of their Lakewood home and the purchase of their new home in Middleburg Heights. Both homes are under contract, and Leilani is excited about the tree house at the new home. So we celebrate with them. And also, I know many of you have been keeping Phil Dell in your thoughts and prayers. Steve's dad passed away around 8:30 this morning. So a stone of gratitude for everyone's prayers and energy for a peaceful passing for Phil. And last, a stone of gratitude for our website team who kept everyone in the loop about our time change for services and made sure you all were here today. Amazing team, and so a stone of gratitude for their work and ministry. What else? If there are other joys or concerns that you're carrying with you that you would like to acknowledge by placing a stone in the water, I invite you to come forward at this time. place a final stone for those joys and concerns shared online today. That after the service, you will stick around and share with one another what these stones might represent to you, so that in sharing our joys, they can be magnified, and in sharing our burdens, they can be lessened. And if you're online or you're not able to stick around today, maybe consider giving a phone call this week. If you shared something today by placing a stone in the water, let someone know what's going on for you, what's on your heart, what you bring into community here with one another, because we welcome all of who we are into this beloved community.
Peter Sheehan, author and CEO of Change Labs, said, "The secret killer of innovation is shame. You can't measure it, but it is there. Every time someone holds back on a new idea, fails to give their manager much-needed feedback, and is afraid to speak up in front of a client, you can be sure shame played a part. That deep fear we all have of being wrong, of being belittled, and of feeling less than, and what stops us taking the very risks required to move our companies forward. If you want a culture of creativity and innovation where sensible risks are embraced on both a market and individual level, start by developing the ability of managers to cultivate an openness to vulnerability in their teams. And this, paradoxically perhaps, requires first that they are vulnerable themselves. This notion that a leader needs to be in charge and know all the answers is both dated and destructive. Its impact on others is the sense that they know less and that they are less than. A recipe for risk aversion, if ever I heard it. Shame becomes fear. Fear leads to risk aversion kills innovation.
What am I holding? Yes, so many of you know this wonderful pattern. On the summer solstice, the Women's Spirituality Group held a wonderful, multi-dimensional evening. And part of this evening was being able to walk the labyrinth. And I'm not sure how many of you here, if you want to raise your hand, how many of you have walked a labyrinth before? Yes. And so this labyrinth is up for 2 more days. And after service today, anyone who would like to walk, I will be kind of holding the space. And I wanted to share a little bit about this kind of very ancient pattern. The one that I am holding is from the Chartres Cathedral in France. So this would be considered the medieval pattern. But labyrinths have been around for over 4,000 years. And in general, labyrinths are, they're an archetype for this journey of moving into the center and moving back out again. So a labyrinth may look like a maze, but it's actually the opposite of a maze. There is one way in, and this pattern leads you on a somewhat circuitous journey to the center, and then this same path leads you back out again. The idea of a labyrinth is that it is a very right brain activity. It's very intuitive. And for those of you who may not like to sit still while you're doing mindfulness or meditating, we talk about the labyrinth as a tool for walking meditation. There are different ways to travel the labyrinth. So I have brought, I think, 9 of these finger labyrinths. So if you would prefer to travel the finger labyrinth as opposed to walking in the labyrinth that has been set up for us, I have plenty of these for us. And this service, I really loved the reflection that Amy just read about shame and fear, and what our shame and fear prevent us from doing or prevent us from becoming. And in my work with veterans over many, many years, and I use the labyrinth with them, both walking it and traveling it with their fingers, what I have learned over many, many years is that this idea of having some compassion for oneself, for where you are at any point in time, is the beginning of any kind of healing or opening up to what our deepest fear or our deepest shame might be. And knowing that everybody has stuff inside of us that can be difficult to connect with. And so the walk that we will be offering after the service is one that, if you choose, can be a walk of asking yourself, talking to yourself about compassion. Compassion for anything that you might be facing in your life right now. So if anyone is interested in learning more about this, please meet me on the west side of the church after the service, and we will do a walk. We will have chairs set up around the walking labyrinth for anybody who would like to sit and travel on the finger labyrinth.
One evening in the fall, 13 years ago, a group of Larchmere neighbors were chatting about ways to promote their fantastic neighborhood, and one neighbor told the group about Porch Fest in Ithaca, New York, where musicians perform on the front porches of homes. One of the neighbors participating in that casual conversation couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of a Porch Fest in Larchmere. She got a group of neighbors and friends together to talk about the idea and test out the interest, and thus the first official Larchmere Porch Fest meeting took place. Porch Fest Committee is made up of people who either live, work, or have ties in the Larchmere and Shaker Square neighborhoods, and this year represented the 14th annual event and featured 22 bands, 22 for 22, who played on porches throughout the Larchmere neighborhood from 2 in the afternoon till 8 at night, plus 4 after-hour parties in local businesses. IOBY, some of you are familiar with that from Don Arrington's affiliation, and the crowdfunding. It's a crowdfunding platform that helped to pay for the improvements actually made in our own playground. Has been a major source of funding for this project, and Don has also been very involved in the Larchmere Porch Fest effort. Our offering this morning will be to benefit Porch Fest Larchmere, and I pulled up, I was curious just to find out a little bit more about it, and I pulled up this really cool map that shows like where all the performances took place, and it was interesting to learn a little bit more about where the money goes. Some of you are interested in knowing about that kind of thing. So, of course, you can imagine it's a pretty huge effort to put something together like that. It involves permits, logistical needs, sound equipment, trash collection. If you look up pictures from the event, you see a huge number of people participate in this. Security, that's probably the biggest line item, actually. And, of course, money for the bands. So please give as generously as you are able to continue the ongoing opportunity for people to enjoy free music in their neighborhood in the Larchmere and Shaker Square area. Thank you.
It is a very innovative way to build community, to provide a variety of music for folks to come together and be one community together, a diverse community together. And so we do a lot to support our strategic plan, our mission statement, by supporting other organizations around us that are doing the things that collectively create what we hope to create together. So I invite you to read with me the acceptance of gifts that's on your yellow pew card. We offer these gifts with gratitude, and we acknowledge the constant gifts of time, talent, and treasure that strengthen and nourish this congregation as a reflection of our commitment to community within and without, our purposeful spirituality that is ever searching and growing, and our intentional actions that lead to greater justice in our congregation, our city, our nation, and our world. We're talking about connection this summer, but leading into that, we're talking about something that prevents us from connection so often, and that is shame. And in order to talk about that, I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to talk more about myself than I usually do. I'm wearing a stole today that I've been waiting almost a year to wear because it has kind of an unusual symbol up here, and instead of trying to explain that symbol, I thought, well, I'll just wait until I can tell the full story to everyone. So you're going to hear that story today. Because way, way, way back in early 2021, which seems like forever ago now, I began a search for full-time ministry in a Unitarian Universalist context. Most of you know what that's like because you went through it fairly recently as well. And early in the process, before I was even connected at all with this congregation, I had a first interview with a congregation, and it went very well. The search committee and I got along well. And a few days later, I got an email from a member of the committee that asked, "What is the Church of Cosmic Indifference?" Well, now I need to take a step back and tell you what it is, because when I finished with my internship at a Unitarian Universalist church, I was scheduled to go to the Ministerial Fellowshipping Committee. That is the committee of the Unitarian Universalist Association that credentials ministers and says, you are fit for ministry, you have our blessing, go forth and do good things. And I canceled that appointment with the Ministerial Fellowshipping Committee. And I took a few years to discern whether a Unitarian Universalist context was the right place for me. And I won't go into all of that today, but what I'll say is that I listened to a small number of, discouraging voices rather than the overwhelming number of affirming voices. And you know where the story winds up, obviously, and eventually I got back on the Ministerial Fellowshipping Committee schedule, and I was granted preliminary fellowship without reservation, and that's a big deal, and I'm very proud of it, but I took the long way around. But in the meantime, I wasn't willing to give up the possibility of being in some kind of ministry. I had some temporary doubts that that would be in a Unitarian Universalist church, but I was still called to ministerial work. So I started a church. Sort of. I thought about what an ideal church might be, and I landed at this odd intersection of cosmicism and humanism. And cosmicism is basically the belief that there is no higher power that's going to interfere or intervene in human lives. Essentially, the cosmos is indifferent to humanity. That's a theology. It's not a theology you have to agree with. It's a way of looking at our relationship to the cosmos. But humanism is one response to that theology. If there's nothing out in the cosmos that's going to take care of us, we need to be responsible in our relationships with one another. Humanism says that our behavior in the world matters, that our relationships with one another matter. And so we are responsible for the world that we create. So I married cosmicism and humanism, kind of like a weird spiritual Reese's peanut butter cup. And yet something was still missing from that, because religions are all about stories. Human beings like to learn from stories, and there aren't a whole lot of stories from a religion that I just invented out of whole cloth. So I didn't want to crib from existing religious texts, and so I chose as kind of a living scripture that's still evolving weird horror fiction. That's weird with a capital W. It's a genre of fiction that specifically I was looking for fiction that expresses this cosmicist perspective. Specifically, really specifically, the cosmicist perspective that was put forth by H.P. Lovecraft about a century ago. Now, the stories themselves don't represent humanist ethics at all, but I was fine with just overlaying that on top of it. Not what the author originally intended, but that's fine. I didn't care about that. Sometimes stories teach us what not to do. Now, some of you know what kind of a person H.P. Lovecraft was, and some of you know what kind of things went into his stories. I would say that he was not just a product of his time when it came to his personal racism and bigotry. He kind of went a step beyond. He was an overachiever in that regard. And so you might think, well, there's no place for a spirituality that talks about humanism with some kind of source like that. That's not a good source of wisdom. And yet, here's what I loved about this genre. H.P. Lovecraft didn't own all of the ideas that he created. First of all, he shared ideas with a lot of other authors that were part of a collective during his time. But since then, over the last 100 years, other authors of weird fiction have taken his ideas and have expanded on them in new ways. And I mean people from marginalized communities, people that H.P. Lovecraft might not have wanted to use as material. But women authors, authors of color, authors from the LGBTQ community have all taken these ideas and are still innovating within this genre and talking about things in really creative ways. Social justice kinds of things, racial justice kinds of things in this genre of weird horror fiction. I could talk about this stuff for days, and I did because the Church of Cosmic Indifference started off as a weekly podcast, and eventually there were videos on YouTube. I wrote a book. The board of the Church of Cosmic Indifference didn't really have the money to invest in publicity, but they were very willing to experiment and learn. And it was my way of continuing to minister to people when I didn't know what context would make sense for that. When I started looking for a full-time ministry position in a Unitarian Universalist church, I knew that I couldn't keep doing both. I didn't need to keep doing both, because if I had a context where I was with a community ministering full-time, then that other project had kind of served its purpose. And the Church of Cosmic Indifference board didn't want to keep going without me, so we just agreed to let it go. There were still videos and podcasts out in the wild, and obviously a member of a search committee had come across them and asked, "What is the Church of Cosmic Indifference?" And so I explained, as I just explained to you, that it had been a way for me to continue my ministerial identity while still being in discernment about serving in a Unitarian Universalist context. And I explained that it was ending and I wasn't going to be trying to do both. And I acknowledged that it was a way of exploring alternative ways of doing ministry for people that probably would never set foot in a brick and mortar church. And that the skills that I learned were one of the key reasons that I was able to shift smoothly into virtual ministry when the pandemic required us to do that. And the response was, "Thanks for the explanation, best of luck." I was off the list. So I panicked obviously. I said, oh no, this clever, innovative, intriguing little thing is going to keep me from doing ministry in a UU church. This is bad. And I went to all the places that the Church of Cosmic Indifference existed online, and I just started shelving everything. I started dismantling the social media presence. I took down the YouTube channel. I wiped the website. Of course, nothing online ever completely disappears, but I was embarrassed about it. Or more accurately, I was ashamed of this thing that I had created. Someone told me that I was unacceptable because of it. Not those exact words, but still. And so I was ashamed of this thing that I created, and ashamed that I had been so excited about it. And so this was like Christmas for my shame gremlin. And by shame gremlin, I mean that little voice in your head that tells you all the things that you've done wrong and exactly how you should feel about it. So my shame gremlin was going 90 to nothing. Oh, wow, you were so smug and irrationally confident about this. You need to just crawl in a hole and hope nobody ever finds out about this. Shame on you. I got over it, obviously. I'm telling you the story today. And it didn't take a long time, but I did have to stop and think about what I was feeling and take a step back to evaluate what I had experienced and the meaning that I had made from that experience. I had to look at the thoughts that were driving my emotions. Because remember, shame and guilt are two different things. Guilt is that sense that I have done something or I have said something that does not align with my guiding principles. And I made a mess and I need to clean it up. That's what guilt is about. It's about something that you've done. Shame is about who I am. Shame says, this is about me. It's not about my behavior. Shame says, I am, at the core of my being, worthless, unlovable, unacceptable, broken, a failure, a burden. You can't fix it. It's just who you are at the core of your being. All those kinds of things are shame. And all of those kinds of things are lies. They're lies. Shame is the bundle of lies that we tell ourselves about ourselves. That's what shame is. So what I realized about the Church of Cosmic Indifference, well, I realized a lot of things. I learned a ton from that experience. Essentially, I was writing a sermon every week, but I also learned about filing for a 501c3, and I learned about podcasting and video editing and all kinds of practical technical skills. I learned about web marketing and what kind of research goes into choosing how to reach the right people. I learned about having board members who are willing to explore possibilities, and the value of board members who were focused on practical limitations, and the amazing things that can happen when those two kinds of people are collaborating together. I grew a lot because of this bizarre project. But more than that, I actually did minister to people. I heard from folks who were wrestling with some really difficult challenges, and they weren't willing to reach out to other spiritual communities and other spiritual professionals, but somehow they were willing to trust me to be their minister. I helped people recognize how to let go of their resentment so that they could take meaningful action. I helped people clarify what they really cared about and live into their values with integrity, the kind of things I hope I'm still doing here with you today. I provided space for folks who felt rejected and condemned by other churches and religious communities to be accepted and affirmed and cared for. I created something worthy of my time and energy, and I am proud of it. So it's appropriate to set it aside. It was appropriate to let go of that at the right time and to focus on being with one community. But I am in no way ashamed of the Church of Cosmic Indifference and what it stood for at that time. But when one person said it didn't make sense, when one person said that I wasn't acceptable because of it, suddenly my shame gremlin got all the confetti and noisemakers out and threw a party. It was the confirmation of every lie that I've ever believed about myself. Not being good enough, not being worthy, or being too big for my britches, as my mom would probably say. All the fears about me come to the surface because of one person's reaction. Funny how little provocation it takes for our shame gremlin when the right person at the right time says the right thing to get us going. And when that shame voice gets going, it can be the loudest thing in my head. I don't know about you, but it just drowns everything else out. So let me tell you what shut it down for me. As I said, taking a step back and putting things in perspective, which means that I can say, this is what happened, and this is the story that I told about it. This is the meaning that I made. So being able to separate what literally happened and the story that I filled in with my imagination, because those are two different things most of the time. And I can track my emotions and see what the thoughts are underneath the feeling. So I can say, I'm feeling really sad right now because I think I'm unacceptable. I'm feeling sad because I have this thought. And the truth might be that someone didn't accept me. That might be true. But I could also name a lot of places where I have been accepted by people. I can name a lot of people who have accepted me. So I'm not unacceptable. So maybe the thing that I'm thinking is not entirely true. It takes a little bit of introspection to figure that out. Now that sort of introspection, digging into what I'm feeling and thinking honestly and recognizing that those are two different things. Your emotions and your thoughts are two different things. That helps me put a damper on my shame gremlin because it helps me see where its power is coming from. The third thing is talking through it with somebody that I trust. Not just talking through it with any old person, but talking through it with somebody that I trust to hold up a true mirror to me. Because shame loves secrecy and silence. And when I'm willing to break that silence, then it loses its power. When I'm listening to my shame voice, I feel like I can't let people see me. I can't let people know who I am. I have to hide that. Because if I let people see me, then they'll judge me and reject me, and so I have to keep myself a secret and stay silent. That's what shame does to us. But as soon as I decide to speak up, that spell is broken. As soon as I decide to get real with someone, one person, and say, I'm feeling really sad about this thing that happened, my shame gremlin loses power. Because in telling the story to another human being, I make my own realizations because I'm saying it out loud, but also that other person might ask some questions that help me realize some new things. Or they might acknowledge my accomplishments in a way that I'm not expecting. They might respond in a way that reminds me of my worth if I'm willing to be vulnerable and open up to them. They might say something like, you are way too hard on yourself. That thing you created was amazing. So we take power back from our shame gremlin when we break the silence. And you may be saying, this is all very interesting, Randy, but I don't feel shame. That is wonderful for you, and I think you're lying. Because if you have ever felt like you had to hide something about yourself, if you have ever felt like you needed to stay silent and not speak up about something, if you have ever felt afraid of what another person would think of you, if you have ever felt self-conscious about your body or your appearance, if you have ever been embarrassed about your work or lack thereof, if you've ever questioned your ability as a parent, if you've ever felt obligated to do something that you didn't want to do for your family members, if you have ever had a mental health diagnosis that you were afraid to let somebody know about, if you have ever experienced some kind of addiction, if you have ever been afraid that someone would stereotype you or label you, all of that is shame. All of that is what your shame gremlin does. And you have the power to make it stop. You can explore your feelings. You can identify what you're thinking underneath those feelings. And the more you do this, just name the feeling and the thoughts that are making you feel that way, the more you start to see what you are believing about yourself. And the more you start to question whether that's really true. Like, if you feel scared and you realize that you're feeling scared because you think that you're unlovable, you can hopefully recognize that this is exactly the kind of lie that your shame gremlin would tell about you, and that you're perfectly lovable. You can start telling the truth about your lovability when you make those kinds of realizations. You can also honestly recognize what you experienced, what you literally experienced, the facts of what happened, and the story that you've been telling about it. Because sometimes the stories that we tell are about the judgments that we have about ourselves and other people. But when we can recognize our perspectives and the lenses that we're looking through to look at those stories, we can see how much of it is really us and how much of it is outside of us. Like if I sent an email last week to someone and I haven't heard back from them, I can tell all kinds of stories about why that person hasn't responded to my email. Some of you recognize those stories. That's great. The facts are, I sent an email and I haven't heard back. That's all that I know. My email could be sitting in their spam folder. Their response could be sitting in my spam folder. They may just have 3,000 emails that they're trying to get to and they haven't seen mine yet. I don't know. We can be curious. We can explore possibilities. But when we recognize that the stories we're telling are just that, then maybe we can recognize our shame gremlin's voice a little more clearly and say, I don't know that. That's not really true. I'm just making something up. And you can break the silence when you start feeling those things about yourself that may not be true. You can break the silence and stop hiding who you are and embrace the reality that vulnerability is a superpower. It really, really is. Authenticity makes human bonds grow stronger, and it gives us power over our shame gremlins. Vulnerability is how we in our relationships, builds those relationships, makes them stronger. It's how we open the way to being more deeply known and accepted, which is what we all want. And you have so much to be proud of, legitimately proud of. There is nothing about who you are that is shameful. You have inherent worth. You are worthy. You are enough. And you have the power to silence your shame gremlin and live into that worthiness. So I invite you to take a moment for reflection now. Because sometimes we think that feeling like we're worthy is arrogance. But being worthy and knowing it is an act of authentic humility. How did you get to be so worthy, so beautiful, so capable, so lovable, so amazingly amazing? You didn't ask for it. You don't remember ever doing anything to deserve it. And yet, here you are, worthy, capable, lovable, acceptable, beautiful. Being worthy and knowing it is an act of rebellion against a world that asks us to prove ourselves and compete for attention and empty accolades and insincere affirmation. Being worthy and knowing it is an act of witness, modeling for a world of people who constantly doubt themselves, how they too can be free. Being worthy and knowing it is freedom, an authentic and humble act of rebellion, honest testimony to the worthiness of all. Being worthy and knowing it is a calling from the depths of your spirit to be in love with who you are, with all of who you are. Lovable, acceptable, capable, beautiful, worthy. Amen, and blessed be. We're going to sing together. I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we do. If you are joining us online today, I'll remind you to like, share, subscribe, do all the things that will help us extend our ministry out into the virtual world. I'll just remind you that Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, we'll have a time to gather in grief, in anger, in solidarity. And there's a labyrinth right after the service. If you don't know east from west, it's that way. That's where it is. You may have seen it set up as you came in. There will be chairs out there if you would prefer to sit and do a finger labyrinth in that space and not walk the labyrinth itself. You can still be in that space together. And if labyrinth is not in your schedule for the day, I invite you to join us downstairs for time to socialize with one another and have a little coffee. We are in orange with our COVID stuff, so masks are at your discretion, but if you are in conversation with somebody who requests that you put a mask on, I'm confident that you'll do so graciously. May we go forth from this place, aware of our shame voice and willing to do what it takes to silence it and affirm our lovability and worth and the lovability and worthiness of all around us. Go with peace and courage.
Join me as we extinguish the chalice with the words on your yellow cards. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.